Okay, so the first speaker of today in the digital signature session is Isayan, who will talk about efficient unconditionally secure signatures using universal hashing.
What if I don't use the microphone? Can I just speak? Can everyone hear me in the back? Okay, I'll use the microphone. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to talk about unconditional secure digital signatures, and this was a joint work with Ryan Amiri and Erica Anderson at Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh and Petros Leuven at University of Edinburgh. As you all know, digital signatures are widely used in everyday online transactions, and the widely used digital signatures are based on public key crypto, on mathematically hard problems, and they provide computational security, but with quantum computers, most of them could potentially be broken. And due to this, there is two other branches of digital signatures, which lies in the post-quantum realm, and one is post-quantum crypto. They're still based on computational hard problems, but for which there's no known quantum algorithms to efficiently solve. And another type which doesn't make any assumptions, which is information theoretically secure digital signatures. And this talk will focus on such information theoretically secure digital signatures. And ITS digital signatures, they provide, in addition to authenticity, they provide transferability. And as you all know, message authentication provides only guarantee that a message was, for instance, sent by the claimed sender, and only the receiver can be convinced that it was sent by the sender. But the receiver of a message and its authentication tag cannot persuade another third party that the message was sent by the original sender, because of the symmetric key nature of message authentication codes, because the receiver could have generated the message tag pair. And unconditional secure digital signatures, in a sense, is an extended message authentication codes, in the sense that they provide transferability for the message, for the authentication tag. So the unconditional security comes at a certain cost, and the most obvious one is it requires shared secret keys among all participants, the players, mutually shared secret keys. And the signature length is quite larger, as you will see later on. And so for these two reasons, they are not really a suitable replacement for many current core uses of digital signatures. But they must be viewed as a complement to quantum key distribution in a fixed network system, and where the QKD network allows the players to agree on the needed shared secret keys among the players. And they have potential uses, such as in high-value banking transactions, or when signing legal documents that requires high security, and could also be used in guaranteeing important and sensitive communications in government organizations. But they, again, must be there must be an existing QKD network or any other unconditional secure key agreement mechanism which allows the participants to agree on a secret key. The QKD network is the current unconditional secure key agreement scheme, so that's why there must be an existing QKD network for unconditional secure digital signatures to be viable. So what do we contribute in this paper? So we extend the traditional Wegman-Carter information theoretically secure authentication code by adding transferability for the authentication tags. And there's no need for trusted third parties as in other unconditional secure digital signatures, and there is no need for anonymous and authenticated broadcast channels. Compared to previous known unconditional secure digital signature schemes, the presented scheme has a number of advantages, such as short key length, short signature length, and very efficiency due to the underlying building blocks, which is universal hash functions. So how does the construction works? There's 2 stages for the construction. The first is the distribution phase, where the players agree on mutually secret keys. So a sender would share a set of secret keys with all the potential receivers of the message, and also the receivers would exchange keys among them. And the messaging phase, where the sender signs the message and sends it to, of course, the recipients, and then the recipients would verify the validity of the signature. And the building block is universal 2 hash functions. To be more exact, it's strongly universal 2 hash functions, and it's a set of hash function families which satisfy 2 conditions. The first one is in the set of hash functions for any message. There is exactly the total number of hash functions divided by the total number of tags, hash functions in the family that maps any message to any tag. And the second condition is for any distinct messages, the number of hash functions that map the first message to a tag and the second message to another tag, which could be equal to the first tag. There is exactly the total number of hash functions divided by the square of the total number of hash functions, tags in the tags. So actually these 2 conditions for the hash function family is quite telling that why they were the building blocks for unconditional secure message authentication codes as proposed first by Wegman and Carter. The first condition is what bounds the impersonation attack in message authentication codes. If an adversary, for instance, without impersonates a sender and just sends a message, the adversary has to guess the tag without knowing the key, and all tags are equally probable. And the second condition bounds the adversary's attack in success probability in the substitution attack, where the adversary intercepts the message tag pair and tries to forge a tag for another message, for a message of her own. And the probability in that case is still 1 over. All tags are equally probable for the adversary's tag. So seeing a message tag pair wouldn't give any information to the adversary. So having presented the building blocks, so let's look at the distribution phase of the construction. So in the first phase, the sender would share a set of keys with each participant. So in this case, if there's n potential receivers of the message, n times k, and k is the number of hash functions shared with each participant. So there's n squared k keys. Each of them is of length that's needed to describe a hash function in the universal hash function family. And then the participants would, each participant has nk hash functions, and then they would split this nk hash function into n blocks of k hash functions and share this among each other. And then in the signing phase, the signature for a message would be just the tag, the hash of the message under all the hash functions shared between the sender and all the receivers. And whenever a recipient wants to verify the validity of a signature, the receiver would compute the hash of the message under all the hash functions that it shares with the receiver, with the sender, and all the intermediate parties that transfer the message. And if they're all equal, then the message is accepted as, the signature is accepted as valid, otherwise rejected. So an example we can take a look is, so suppose there are 3 parties, and A is the sender, and B and C are the receivers. And suppose that A wants to send a message, sign a message using this construction. And so if we take 12 as the total number of keys shared with among the players, between the sender and all the receivers, then A would send the first 6 hash functions to B, and then the next 6, 7 through 12 to C, and then B and C would further share the keys that it shares with the receiver, with the sender A. So B in this case would split F1 through F6 to a set of 2 hash functions of size 3. And let's say in this case it just splits the first 3 and then the last 3, and then sends the last 3 F4, F5, F6. And also what's important is the index of the hash functions that is shared, because the signature in the end would be the hash of the message under all the keys in an ordered fashion. If the indices are not correct, then the verification would fail. And then C would do the same, and suppose that it shares F7 through F9 with B, and also sends the corresponding indices. So when a message is signed, all the hash of the message under all these 12 hash functions are computed, and then these 12 tags are sent along with the message to B. And to check the validity of the signature, B would compute the hash of the message under the hash functions that it shares with A, which is F1 through F6, and then what C had shared with himself, which is 7, 8, 9 in this case. And C would do the same, so to compute all the hash of the message under all the hash functions that it shares with the others, and then if all matches, then the message is accepted as, this signature is accepted as valid. So how is the security of unconditional secure digital signatures defined? There are 3 requirements for such a scheme, and one is unforgeability, which is similar to the digital signature scheme. An adversary should not be able to forge a signature for a message without knowing the secret key. And transferability, which guarantees that when a recipient verifies a signature as valid, then the receiver should be able to also convince others that it was the signature is a valid signature. And non-repudiation, meaning that the signer should not be able to deny having signed a message that it created in the first place. So following the definition, which is formalized by Swanson and Stinson in Information Theoretic Security Conference in 2011, we proved the security of the presented construction that it satisfies all enforceability, transferability, and non-repudiation, and the security bounds takes into account some parameters which I completely ignored in the presentation. So comparison with other unconditional secure digital signatures, and in terms of signature size, while our scheme requires twice the number of hash functions that they sender shares with all the recipients. The other scheme, which is by these HSDI, it's the initials of 4 Japanese authors. It requires omega plus 1 times A, and here the omega is the number of dishonest parties among the players, and A is the length of the message. And the quantum digital signatures, it also requires of order n squared times the message length. And so the relation between A, the message size, and K, which is the hash function, K is the number of hash functions that that each receiver shares with the other recipients, and each hash function has a description length logarithmic in the message length, if you'd like to know the relation between the K and A in this case. And in terms of key size, it's also compares favorably with the other constructions. So if we compare this with the standard digital signature schemes in terms of with specific numbers, and this is quite dated, and I haven't checked with the NIST submissions for post-quantum signatures, and if you're familiar with it, just please let me know later on. And this is for a message of length 1 megabit, and n equals 50 when there are 50 players, and the bottom 2 rows is how much what is the length of the key and the signature size, and the last row is the case where we make use of a trusted authority. In the beginning I mentioned that one advantage is that we do not require a trusted authority, but having one trusted authority would make life easier, and as you can see, the key size and the signature size is reduced significantly. So what can we take home with this? So there are some positives for unconditional secure digital signatures, and one is apparent unconditional security, and they are efficient compared with the current one is with other unconditional secure digital signatures, and the main reason is the underlying building blocks, which is strong universal hash functions, which is very, very, very efficient. And they are easily implementable with the current QKD technologies, but it comes with these negatives, like very large signature and key lengths, and the level of security provided may not be needed for, may not be necessary for many, many applications. So to summarize, the unconditional secure signature scheme is based on universal 2 hash functions, and it's very, very simple and very easy to understand. And as you have seen, it doesn't require any trusted parties, or it doesn't require any anonymous and authenticated channels, broadcast channels. But having a trusted party, of course, would help reduce the required key length and signature lengths. And in comparison with the existing classical and quantum digital signatures, and all quantum digital signatures are supposed to be unconditionally secure, which I haven't mentioned. The current scheme requires fewer resources and is much more efficient. So with that, I thank you all, and if you have any questions, please ask.
Any questions? Okay.
Okay, so the final talk before the break will be by Cecilia on floppy-sized group signatures from lattices. Do you want to use the fancy one?
So, hi, I'm a PhD student at IBM Zurich, and I'm going to talk to you about floppy-sized group signatures from lattices, because you never know. You might want to store your signature on a floppy, so we must be ready for it. So this is a joint work with Jan Kemenisch and Gregory Leuven from IBM. And what I'm going to do is basically just tell you what group signatures are, and then just go directly into the construction. What is a group signature? A group signature is quite a very interesting protocol, because basically what allows is for, let's assume we're in this setting. So we have Alice, and Alice has a document that needs to be signed, but by somebody in a group. So somebody in the group of Bobs. It doesn't really matter who, just somebody. So what a group signature allows you to do is for Alice to get back the document signed without knowing, and she can check whether the signature is valid or not, but she is not allowed to know who signed. She only knows that somebody in the group signed. And why this is interesting is that it's because group signatures are, let's say, the basic privacy-preserving protocols, as for example, anonymous credentials and DAA can be built on top of them, or at least starting from a group signature construction. But what you could tell me is, well, sure, we have ring signatures to do it, why do we need group signatures? Well, and first of all, what's the difference? So, a ring signature basically is just a group of users that agree on, let's say, generate the signing keys, and then can, as in the group signature, sign anonymously on behalf of the group. And then the signature produced by, let's say, a person in the group of the ring signature cannot be de-anonymized. So once a person signs using the ring signature scheme, the signature will be anonymous forever. And this is different from the group signature, because in the group signature we have two entities. We have a group manager, and the group manager is the entity that takes care of generating the signing key of the users. And then we have an opener. Well, of course, now I have presented them as two different entities. Of course, depending on the security model, we can have them being the same, but anyway, it's easier to understand, I think. And what the opener does is opening a signature. So basically, checking who actually signed the document. So if we go back and we have the group of Bobs, now let's assume that let's say a signature by somebody in the group of Bobs was on a document that in theory should not have been signed. So what Alice can do is go to the opener and say, well, I suspect this signature shouldn't have been here. Can you check who did it? And then the opener can look for the Bob that has to be blamed. Good. So what are the algorithm of a group signature? First of all, there is a joining phase where the group manager, well, a user goes to the group manager and asks to join the group and receives a user ID and a user signing key. So in this setting, the issuer is trusted, so the joining phase happens completely in the clear. Actually, the easiest way in this case is just to assume that the group manager will generate the user ID and the user secret key. And then the signing algorithm sees, so when a user in the group receives a message, will just generate a signature using the user signing key. And then, to allow for later on the signature to be opened, will somehow hide his user identity in the signature. And then what Alice will be able to do is just to receive the signature and verify that this signature is coming from somebody in the group of Bobs. She doesn't know by which Bob was generated, but she knows that at least it was one in the group. And then what the opener can do is to take the signature and then recover, using his opener secret key, the identity of the signer. Good, so security. First of all, as we said, we want it to be anonymous. So we want to be able to recover the identity of the signer, but we don't want everybody to be able to do it, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. There is no point in anonymity in the first place. So anonymity guarantees that if everybody but the, if everybody but the opener is corrupted, even the group manager, still a signature should be anonymous, so should not leak the identity of the signer. And then we have traceability. Traceability says that whenever there is a signature out there from the group of Bobs, it will always be possible to open it and see, and let's say link it back to the signer. It should be impossible to produce a signature for, let's say there is a dishonest Bob that wants to produce a signature and then not being traced back. This should not be possible. Good. So what's the idea? So one way of building a group signature is the following. We can assume that to add a user to the group manager will use a digital signature to sign the identity of the user. And then later on, when the user will want, there is a typo. Anyway, later on, when the user will want to sign a message, we'll produce a fiat Shamir signature that the user has a signature by the group manager on his or her user identity. And finally, to allow for opening, given that it can't be really extracted from the fiat Shamir proof, and we will see why, the user will also add an encryption of the identity to the signature, so that when Alice will, for any reason, need to recover who actually the signer was, could go to the opener, and the opener can decrypt the identity. Good. And now, the security requirements for our building blocks are the following. First of all, we need the signature to be unforgeable, because, and by signature might be unclear, but I mean the digital signature that is used in the issuance, in the joining protocol. And this has to be unforgeable, otherwise a user can just decide to join the group and forge a signature on a random identity without the help of the manager. And then we will need the non-interactive zero-knowledge proof to be extractable and for traceability. And then we will need the encryption to be CCA2 secure for anonymity. So encryption should not leak anything about the identity of the signer. Great. So now, what about group signature on lattices? Actually, there are many group signatures on lattices, and the problem with these schemes is that they're not practical. So I had a look at the numbers, and in this paper in 2016, should be by Ling et al. I have the reference at the end. Anyway, they had signature that were 60 megabytes big, and this is too much. So we decided, well, let's try to see whether if we use all the most efficient techniques that are known on lattices, let's see whether we can actually get an efficient signature. So basically, what I'm going to present now is a combination of the signature with protocol from this paper by myself, Kamenisch and Leuven, and then with the verifiable encryption by Lubachevsky and Leuven. And basically, the idea is we had a look at all the previous construction, and all of them were built on integer lattices. And then we decided, well, maybe it's better or more efficient, well, it's definitely more efficient to use ideal lattices, so lattices over the polynomial ring. And then we, instead of using, then of course, if we move to ideal lattices, then using this type of signature, Bayesian signature, required some adaptation, because Bayesian signature is on integer lattices. And that's what we presented in our previous paper. And then we decided to use as a NISIX instead of Stern-type proofs that need to be repeated like a lot of time. We decided to use Lubachevsky's Viet-Chomier boards with a very large set of challenges, so that the proof only needs to be repeated like a couple of times to guarantee the soundness. Good. And finally, we modified the verifiable encryption scheme by Lubachevsky and Leuven to support the more efficient proof, because we needed it for, well, I'll show you. Actually, because otherwise we wouldn't be as efficient as we are. So what's the idea? We decided to work on polynomial ring, in particular, ZQ of x over x to the n plus 1, and then the message space that in particular here is the space of identities. Sorry, this is really not clear. So let's say the space of identities of the users is the set of sparse polynomials with coefficients in 0, 1. And then the signing key will be a trapdoor for Michancho bytecode trapdoor, and the public key, the random matrices A, B, C, and U. And then if we want to sign, this is basically almost exactly a combination of Bayesian signature with the Michancho bytecode trapdoor. We will just use the trapdoor to find a short vector S1, S2, S3, such that this equation holds. So A, B, C plus mg times S is equal to U. And the message, as you can see, is inside the matrix on the left side. The right side. And this is actually not really nice, because now, so this protocol will be used for the joining phase, right? So we have the group manager producing the vector S and the user identity M, and then giving this to the user. And the user now has to prove knowledge of M and S without leaking any information about them. But the point is that, so over lattices, now if we write the equation, over lattices it's not clear how to prove knowledge in an efficient way of a product of secret. And the problem here is this term MGS3. Because we had no idea how to prove that we knew an M and S3 such that the product with G would satisfy the equation. So what we did is sidestep the problem. And we decided to somehow blind the part C plus mg of the public matrix that contained the user identity, and then to add another line to the proof to prove that, let's say, behind the blinding part there was actually hidden the user identity. And that's how we did it. We generate a vector f equal to c plus mg plus e divided by b, where e and b are small errors. And the idea is that if you rewrite it as fb plus e equal to c plus mg, what you get is that f is hiding under wrinkle we. And now, what we can do is to substitute f into the verification equation that we had before. So instead of having c plus mg, now we have only f, and a slightly different vector for the signature. So this is the first step. Now, at least we can prove that we have a signature, because in the public key there is no dependency on the user identity anymore. And now, what we need to do is to prove that there is also a user identity corresponding to the signature. And how we do it? Well, it's just we add another equation to prove that f actually hides the small polynomial m. Great. So this seems almost done. And now you could start wondering, well, now if you add an encryption scheme, then we're done. Because you have your NISX, you have your encryption of the user identity, and then you can do opening and you have anonymity, so we're all set. But yeah, this is not really the case. Because having very efficient genre type proof with a large set of challenge comes with some drawbacks, and in particular comes with the fact that extraction is not really exact. So if this is the standard Lubezewski's Fiat-Shamir with a board, where we use rejection sampling and everything, and then what happens is that when you extract, well, when an extractor reminds the prover to extract a witness, what it gets is just a witness for an approximate relation. So this A z bar times c bar equals to c bar u, instead of having the original A s equal u. So this is a problem because we cannot guarantee traceability now. So what we did in the original paper last year was just to relax the opening algorithm of the signature and say that, well, whatever satisfies either the exact relation or the approximate relation is good enough, and it's still a valid signature. But that worked there. It doesn't work with the group signature, because we need to recover the exact identity of the user. We cannot recover an approximation. So that's why we needed the verifiable encryption scheme. And what is a verifiable encryption scheme is basically an encryption scheme plus a NISC. So it's an encryption scheme that allows to prove on top of it that the plaintext also satisfies some relation. And how it works, or let's say how the original construction worked, was that it combined the wrinkle WE encryption with, again, Fiat-Shamir with a board, and it turned out to be 4 algorithms, key generation, encryption, that would, well, we need to be careful here. So encryption would return the ciphertext and the NISC, and then we have a verification algorithm that would verify that the ciphertext, well, that the NISC is correct with respect to the ciphertext, and then a decryption algorithm. And in particular, this is how they do it. So if we have, so the relation that would prove is a standard Bs equals u mod p, where p is some small prime, and then they would encrypt the witness S using wrinkle WE encryption. So this was right, and then decryption. For decryption, we would need to be careful because they have the same problem. If you use Fiat-Shamir with a large set of challenges, then what you get is that you're not proving this exact relation, but what you actually prove is the approximate relation. So instead of proving that you know some vector S such that b times S is equal to u mod p, you are proving that b times S is equal to c u mod p. And again, the intuition behind the correctness of the scheme is that they proved that decryption is correct only if, for all the possible challenges that we can use, S over C is small. And basically, you can see it from here. Basically, what happens is that you're guaranteed that whatever you decrypt, even if the relation is approximated, is the correct message. Now, we needed to adapt the scheme for the following reason. First of all, the scheme required to encrypt the entire vector S. And we're not really interested in encrypting also B and recovering also B and E, because these are just errors, like small vectors that we added to mask the identity. So the first step that we need, let's say the first modification that we needed was to allow to encrypt only part of the witness S. And then the second problem we had is that the original scheme only proved, let's say, required to have a relation holding, like a linear relation holding mod P, and then encryption would be done mod Q, where Q and P are 2 primes, and Q is way larger than P. But when we started writing our scheme and then computing parameters, we figured out that Q would be, well, that our Q would be already large. So we would have needed even larger, let's say Q prime, to do the encryption. So what we did instead, we just adapted the scheme to have it, to allow to prove a linear relation mod Q instead of mod P. Good, so to wrap it up, how does the joining phase work? Basically, a user will arrive and ask to join the group, and the group manager will send back an identity M and the signature produced as before. And then to sign a message M, the user will sign it with a standard feature mirror signature, so an interactive zero-knowledge proof that will prove the following relations. First of all, the, let's say, masked signature relation, where instead of having C plus MG, we actually have F. And then it will have to prove that F is actually hiding the user identity. And finally, that the user identity that is hidden in F is the same that we encrypted. And as a side note, the encryption is made non-interactive with the Naur-Jung construction, so we need to prove this twice. But this is just a technical detail. And then for security, well, so beyond signature is selectively secure. So in order to have it adaptively secure, we had 2 approaches. The first one was just to introduce new hardness assumptions. And then the second one was to reduce this new hardness assumption to ring sys and ring LWE using complexity leveraging. But we knew, right, and the scheme needs to be CCA2 secure using Naur-Jung. So back to the security assumptions, the point with complexity leveraging is that the technique is controversial. So what we decided to do is to give parameters for both approaches. One for security with complexity leveraging, so the security of the scheme based on ring sys and ring LWE, but using complexity leveraging. And then the other set of parameters for the scheme that is secure on the new hardness assumptions. Right, and security is proved in the random oracle model. So we're not claiming that this scheme is post-quantum, as the random oracle model is not post-quantum secure. And so finally, these are the parameters. The comparison is with respect to this paper by Leuven et al. From Eurogroup 2016. And what we have is that for the same bits of quantum security, because still, this scheme is not post-quantum, but at least because this is proved secure in the random oracle model, but we still computed security with respect to quantum adversaries for ring sys and ring LWE. And then we can guarantee a group size of 2 to the 26 and signature that can actually fit in a floppy. So, thank you.
The next talk will be given by Luca, who's going to talk on the security notions for homomorphic signatures.
Thank you for the introduction. So I'm going to talk about security notion for homomorphic signatures, and this is a joint work with Dario Catalano from University of Catania and Dario Fiore from Invia Software. So let me make a step back to the general problem. So the general problem is a problem of authenticity in computations. Imagine you have a user, Alice, that has some messages that she wants to outsource to a cloud. So she sends the messages to the cloud, and then later on we have another user, Bob, that wants to compute a function over the data that Alice sent to the cloud. Of course, the cloud can send back the result of the computation, but then, as you can imagine, there is a problem that is, did the cloud compute the function honestly or not? So we need a way in order to ensure to Bob that does not see the messages, does not have the messages in his hands, to be sure that the cloud, which is, of course, not trusted, behaved correctly. So how can we solve the problem directly and trivially? We can give Alice a secret key, we can make Alice to sign her data, and then she can send the data to the cloud along with the authenticators. Later on, when Bob comes, we can give Bob a verification key, which is like the blue one, and when he wants to compute a function, then the cloud is sampling the message and the corresponding authenticators that Bob needs in order to compute the function over inputs of his choice, and then Bob does the following. So he checks message by message if the messages are valid by checking the authenticators using the verification key, and if everything goes through, then Bob computes locally the function that he wants to compute. Of course, this thing is highly inefficient. Why? The main reason is that every time Bob wants to compute a function, he has to download all the input that he needs, apart from computing the function by himself. And assume that Bob has like limited storage capacity, this thing could be, simply unaffordable by Bob. So we have to overcome this kind of limitation, and that's why homomorphic signatures come into play. How does it work? So the user, Alice, takes her messages, she has a secret key, she signs all the messages, and she sends everything to the cloud, as in the dummy solution. Then, when Bob wants to compute the function over the messages, basically the cloud returns the result of the computation, but not only that. Basically, the cloud is allowed to perform a weird procedure, like running a magic machine, that takes a bunch of authenticators over the input that Bob asked and succeeds in providing an authenticator for the result of the computation that can be attached to the result of the computation to Bob, such that Bob can either accept or reject the result. So, a bit more formally, we can describe homomorphic signatures as a bunch of polynomial time algorithm, a key generation algorithm that takes in input a security parameter and outputs a triple of keys, a secret key, which is the one that Alice used to authenticate, an evaluation key that is the one used by the cloud in order to perform this magic procedure, and a verification key, which is the one that Bob uses in order to verify the computation that the cloud provides him. So in homomorphic signatures, the verification is public, meaning that anybody can verify results from the cloud. So that's why in this talk we will refer to both the evaluation key and the verification key as a generic public verification key. Then we have the authentication procedure. The authentication procedure takes the red key, the secret key, a message identifier which basically says which position, let's say, in the data set the message belongs to, and the message, and outputs an authenticator for the message itself. The evaluation procedure, as I was telling you before, takes the evaluation key, a function which is the one asked by Bob, and a bunch of authenticators, and returns an authenticator for the output of the function. And then the verification, which is the one run by Bob, takes a verification key, the function itself, a message, and an authenticator, and either accept or reject the message as the result of the computation computed over previously authenticated data. Now what you can wonder is which are the properties that we want from such a primitive. First, we want correctness. So correctness says that if Alice is computed computed the authenticator software messages. If the cloud honestly runs the evaluation procedure, then the verification has to go through. In a few words, you can say that if everything works fine and honestly, then the result of the computation should verify the verification procedure. Then we want succinctness. This is actually the key property of homomorphic signatures. You know, it's the thing that really differentiates from the dummy approach. So we want the size of the authenticator that is provided by the cloud in order to prove the correctness of the result of the computation to be logarithmic in the dataset size. So in Alice's data, in the size of the data that Alice is outsourced to the cloud. And then we want security, which is actually the thing that we are dealing with in this paper. Roughly speaking, we can say that without a secret key, an adversary cannot make the verifier to accept a false result. And we will see in a minute that this kind of property is kind of difficult to define, and it's really worth to investigate more about that. What about related words? So the notion of homomorphic signatures was introduced by Johnson in 2002, and then a lot of works have been developed on this kind of field. First for linear function over vector spaces, where we have a bunch of candidates. Then, more recently, for polynomials, where we have just a few constructions, and then for general circuits of bounded polynomial depth. The most significant work in this kind of last area is like this GVW15, which provides basically the first level fully homomorphic signature scheme in the literature. So, as I was telling you before, security is kind of tricky to define with respect to homomorphic signatures. The first, and the thing is that security model for homomorphic signatures before our work were either not expressive enough, as I will explain you in a minute, or really difficult to understand and efficiently test. And that's where this work puts itself in order to solve basically two of these problems in one shot. So the first definition was proposed by Bonnet and Freeman in 2011, and it used to work like that. So we have Alice, we have Bob. Alice is like the owner of the data, Bob is the verifier, and the security experiment worked like this. We assume that the cloud is malicious, and we allow the cloud to basically ask Alice the authentication of all data sets. So the cloud can ask an entire data set to Alice, and Alice can answer back with the authenticators of the message in the data set, so that, you know, the malicious cloud has like data set with which are authenticated. And he can do it multiple times. So for example, he has the blue one which is authenticated, the green one which is authenticated, and the purple one which is not. Then the forgeries, so the ways that the cloud can cheat, are defined in two ways. The first one is the cloud the cloud sends a message with an authenticator over a data set that was not queried under the query phase. As you can see, the purple one does not have any authenticator. And the second way you can cheat is, okay, I will provide Bob a false result of a computation over a data set that had been authenticated before. The first one is known as type 1 forgery, the second one is known as type 2 forgeries, and basically Bob is in charge for accepting or rejecting, and if Bob accepts one of these two things, then the malicious cloud wins. So, it's kind of, you know, a good model, but where the problem arises. So the thing is, in this model, the cloud authenticates the whole data set in one shot. And this does not really, is not really good for like real-life application, for example, streaming of data, where we have basically a stream of data that has to be authenticated like on the fly, and where it's not really clear what a data set really is. So in order to overcome this limitation, in 2012, Freeman proposed another kind of forgery, and another kind of experiment. In this experiment, basically now the cloud is allowed to adaptively ask different messages from different data sets. So as you can see, he can ask something from the blue one, something from the purple one, something from the green one, getting back the corresponding authenticators. He can do it multiple times, so that at the end of the day, he has a bunch of messages which are authenticated on the blue one, some other on the purple one, and some other on the green one. As you can see, there are some of them who are missing. For example, I don't know, the number 3, the number 5 in the blue, and so on in the others. So now, apart from the other two forgeries that I already pointed out, there is these other possibilities. So the cloud can claim to have computed the functions over messages that belong to one of the data sets, but where like some of them were not authenticated during the query phase. For example, here he's claiming to compute the function over the message number 1, 2, and 5 of the blue data set, but he only requested authenticators for message 1 and message 2. So he did not ask any authenticator for the message 5. Bob again is in charge for accepting or rejecting, and the thing is, now the definition says that if Bob accepts and the third input of the function, like the not authenticated one, influences the output of the function itself, then the cloud wins. Now, this thing is related to a notion of well-defined program. And as you can see, just reading this kind of simplification of statement, it's kind of, hard to get what does it mean that an input is influencing or not the behavior of a function. Also because, here the cloud is not giving the message, it's saying, I'm computing over the 5th message. But then, the verifier does not see any message. So the thing is, defining and checking if some subset of input is influencing or not the behavior of the function, generically, can be highly inefficient. Imagine that these messages are bit, and imagine there are n bits, and k of them were not queried during the query phase. In order to understand if some message is influencing the function, we have to basically test 2 to the k candidates. And it's not, efficient. So as you can see, as you saw from the authors list, we are 3 Italian guys, and so we decided to solve the problem at the Italian style. So when there is a problem which is really hard, just pretend it doesn't exist. So what we did, I'm joking, but it's kind of, the intuition we had. So the experiment is exactly the same, but now, basically, if there is some output input that has not been queried during the query phase, if Bob accepts the result, then the cloud wins. Really straight, No matter if the input is influencing the function, we are not even considering this influence or this well-definedness of the function with respect to the data set. And of course, this new security model is really simpler to understand because it's super immediate, and it's stronger because, we are not taking into account the second condition, which is the input is not influencing the output of the function. So, the new contribution, one of the 2 contributions were, okay, a new security model which is stronger, efficiently testable, because you can see if the verification went through and if there was at least one input missing. It's more expressive because with respect to semi-adaptive security, you can deal with streaming of data, but of course there is a problem. And we figured out that existing schemes were not secure in this new model. So, you can have the best model ever, but if nothing is secure in your model, then your model is completely useless. So the second result was, we tried to find a way to go from semi-adaptive security, which was the first one that I described, to strongly adaptive security, which was the simplified version of adaptive security that I described before. So in a way, we wanted a theorem saying, okay, if sigma is a semi-adaptive, unforgeable, fully or level homomorphic signature scheme for Boolean circuits, then there exists a strong adaptive unforgeable homomorphic signature scheme that supports the same classes of functions. And our contribution with these kind of things was showing 2 compilers that can lead from semi to strong adaptive security. So the 2 compilers are kind of similar. The first one uses semi-adaptive or homomorphic signatures. So what we did was, okay, starting from a semi-adaptive secure signature scheme, we built a new signature scheme which is strongly adaptive, that is composed by the original signature scheme, and then a non-homomorphic signature scheme which is again semi-adaptive. So it's secure against the forgery of type 1 and 2, as in the really first model that I explained to you. Which are the pros of this thing? First, the same class of function which is supported by the red scheme are supported by the purple scheme, And then, you know, if the original scheme supports the evaluation of our circuit, then basically you can bootstrap the first scheme in order to be secure under in this new stronger model by, let's say, just doubling the size of the signature. On the negative side, there is only one candidate for homomorphic signature scheme, which is GVW15 I was mentioning before. So in order to overcome this kind of limitation, we introduce another compiler that uses linearly homomorphic signatures. So the intuition is the same. We start from the green sigma and we build the brown sigma by replacing the sigma OR with the sigma linearly homomorphic. On the positive side, this linearly homomorphic signature scheme is like a widely studied primitive, as you can see from like the list of the schemes that are present in the literature. On the negative side, this kind of approach only, let's say, applies to schemes that are level fully homomorphic. The level homomorphic, so basically that deals with circuit of bounded depth. So let me give you an intuition of the technique that we used and of the proof that basically says that our compiler actually works. I'm going to describe the homomorphic case because, you know, the linear homomorphic case is almost the same by replacing the sigma OR with the sigma LH. So the key generation scheme basically runs separately the two key generation schemes. So the keys are basically a merge of a secret key from the green, from the red one, and the secret key from the blue one, and the same with verification key. The signing was basically uses the red one for signing the actual message along with this authenticator and the secret key, while the OR component signs a zero message, always a zero message, and this thing will be clear later, along with the secret key of the OR message, of the OR homomorphic signature scheme, and the message identifier. The evaluation basically runs the evaluation from the red one over the function, and the evaluation of the blue one, of the OR one, over the function FOR. With FOR is simply the circuit that we used, is the same circuit as F, where we change all the gates to be OR gates. And again, the output is like a signature where we have like a red component and a blue component, one for the initial signature scheme and the other one for the OR one. And the verification basically accepts if and only if the verification over the function, the output message, and the red sigma goes through, and if the OR verification verifies over the message 0. Why? Because we have all the inputs set up to 0, we have an OR circuit that basically evaluates all the OR, and so an OR of all zeros has to be 0. Okay, so why do we have strong adaptive security? This is the question, like why our compiler works. Basically, if we have a type 3 strong forgery, which is the one where the verification goes through and there is at least one input which has not been authenticated during the query phase, then we can take part of the forgery, like the OR modification of the forgery circuit, a message 0, and the OR component of the signature, and this signature can be turned into a type 2 forgery for sigma OR. How can we do that? Let's see. So we have an adversary, we have a reduction, and we are basically challenging the sigma OR scheme. So the sigma OR challenger is running the key generation and giving the verification key to the reduction. The reduction is running the key generation from the red signature scheme and is giving back the adversary the verification key pair, which is made up with the red verification key and the blue verification key. Note that with respect to the red scheme, the reduction can basically sign everything she wants, while with the OR scheme, she has to basically ask the challenger, because this is the signature scheme we want to break. Now, when the adversary asks for some message to be authenticated during the query phase, the reduction simply sends the query to the challenger, gets back the result, and sends the results to the adversary. Well, this component is computed directly by the reduction, while this one is the one received by the challenger. Now, what happens when we have a type 3 strong forgery? So type 3 strong forgery, it means that we have a function f stars, we take n inputs, outputs this message m stars, and this signature is verifying. This signature is verifying over m star, and this signature is verifying over 0. Because we said that the verification runs by running the verification of the red one over m star and running the verification of OR on the message 0, because we have all 0 and the NOR of all 0 is 0. So as you can see, there is some input which is missing. So basically the adversary just asks a subset of the n inputs during the authentication phase. Now what can the reduction do? So basically she chooses one input, she chooses one index which is not in the which was not queried by the adversary, and for that index she asks the message 1. So she asks back the message 1, and for all the rest who are missing, so for all the index in n minus j plus the I index, she asks for 0. Now, basically, the reduction asks to the challenger all the input of the function, where for the OR thing, he has asked all 0 but one wire where she put 1. And now the thing is, this kind of thing is a type 2 forgery for the OR signature scheme. Why? Because here, basically, we have a component that verifies for 0, because if it didn't verify for 0, it would not be a type 3 strong forgery. But we know that depending on the query that the reduction made to the OR signature scheme, the OR of all the input that she asked should be 1. Why? Because we have all 0 but one wire which has been set up to 1, and if we make an OR to all 0 but 1, we have 1. But now you know, sigma OR is supposed to be weakly adaptive secure. So basically we broke the security of sigma OR. And that's why this new, this compiler is secure, is strongly adaptive secure. Moreover, if sigma and sigma OR satisfy context hiding, then so does sigma prime. Where with context hiding, we mean the property for which the signatures which are produced by the evaluation algorithm from the cloud do not leak any information about the input that are used to evaluate the function. So basically, what does it mean practically? It means that Bob, when receives the signature, does not learn anything about the input that are stored into the cloud. And moreover, if sigma and sigma OR satisfy efficient verification, then so does sigma prime. Where with efficient verification, we mean that we can split the verification procedure in two sub-algorithms. The first one, which is really expensive and can be performed once offline, and then a really light one, which can be done online, and it's kind of more efficient. So similar techniques and result also when we replace the linearly homomorphic signature scheme, the OR homomorphic signature scheme with the linearly homomorphic one, and so that's how we get the two compilers. So just to sum up, the first problem were that existing security model for homomorphic signatures were either not expressive enough, for example in the case of streaming of data, or difficult to understand and efficiently test. And our contribution in this sense was proposing a new security model which is stronger, efficiently testable, and more expressive. The second problem that arose after proposing this model was that existing signature schemes were not secure in this new model, and for that we have two compilers from semi to strong adaptive security, and moreover we have context hiding and efficient verification that are preserved if the two building blocks have this property. Thanks.
Since we are running a bit late, no time for questions. You can ask them offline. Let's thank them again.
So the next speaker is Patrick, and he will talk about invisible sanitizable signatures and public key encryption are equivalent.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So this is joint work with Mark Fischlin, also from TU Darmstadt, and it's about sanitizable signatures. So if you've never stumbled across this primitive, don't worry. You can think of sanitizable signatures as ordinary signature schemes with some added functionality. So you still have your signer Alice, identified by a public-private key pair, and your verifier Bob. But you also have a third party, which we call Sanitizer Charlie, who also has a public-private key pair. And the idea now is that whenever Alice signs a message, she can flag certain message parts as admissible for modification, so that later on, when Charlie gets the message, he can modify those admissible parts at will and update the signature without affecting the authenticity and integrity of the mutable parts. So in a bit more detail, suppose Alice wants to sign this message. First thing she does is she retrieves Charlie's public key. And then she runs with this information, she runs the signing algorithm, which allows her to designate certain message blocks, here for example the word Fox, as admissible. And this fact is encoded into the signature. And later on, when Charlie gets the signed document, he retrieves Alice's public key, and then running the sanitization algorithm, he can change Fox to Cal, for example. The signature then is no longer valid, but he can then update it, so that when Bob gets the changed message with the updated signature, he's still, Bob retrieves the keys and he still is happy, so still the signature verifies. Of course, there's no need for Charlie to always interact in this process, so you can also have the case where Alice sends the document directly to Bob, he retrieves the public keys, and he still, the signature still verifies, of course. Now you might wonder, why is this primitive interesting, or why should we care? So let me give you one simple use case. So suppose you have a hospital, here you see Dr. Alice, and doctors working at this hospital are kind of tech savvy, so whenever they sign patient records, they don't do this with pen and paper, but they have digital records, and they get themselves signatures, key pair for a signature scheme, and put a digital signature on the patient record, and then send it off to a central server. So after one iteration of this process, it looks somehow like this. And of course, there's many patients treated here and many doctors working at the hospital, so after a couple of iterations you have many documents lying there at the central server. Now suppose at some point someone comes along and says, oh, we would like to make a survey of treatment outcomes from last year. So the manager of the hospital could say, well great, we have this central repository of patient records, let's just give them to Bob. The problem is that these records may contain very sensitive information, so actually Bob could learn much more than is strictly required, so this is not a desirable approach. Another thing that's possible, you could say, well, let's ask the server to delete the sensitive information and then pass it on to Bob, but of course this breaks the standard signatures, so Bob has no guarantee that the information he's getting is actually authentic. So no. You could also resend the records to the doctors, ask them to remove the sensitive information, re-sign the records and send them over to Bob, but this is much overhead for the doctors, so this is something we don't want. And now maybe you're wondering, well, wouldn't it be great if the primitive supported another party, let's say here Nurse Charlie, who could take these patient records, delete the sensitive information, update the signatures, and then pass it on to Bob, so that Bob still is happy with what he gets. And of course, sanitizable signatures are exactly the primitive that are meant to address a situation like this. So as you can imagine, this added third party considerably complicates the picture of security notions when compared to the relatively simple situation of ordinary signatures, because there's many more things that you could ask for, basically. So there's not just standard unforgeability, which protects against forgeries from outsiders. You also want immutability, which basically states that the sanitizer is only allowed to modify the blocks that he's supposed to. You could ask for privacy, which means that the original content of a sanitized document cannot be retrieved from the sanitized signature. And well, there's many more things that you can ask for. The one property that's interesting for this talk is invisibility, which aims at hiding from outsiders which message blocks the sanitizer is allowed to modify. So the block structure of the message is always public, but no one can tell whether the sanitizer is allowed to modify one specific block. So till now I've used this notation here to denote that a block is admissible. From now on, if the scheme is invisible, I will use this dashed box, which basically means that when someone comes along and they're not authorized to know which blocks can be modified, this is what they see. And of course, the security notion can be formalized in a game-based fashion. So you would have the challenger that sets up the experiment. So he generates a signer and a sanitizer key pair, gives the public keys to the adversary, and then the adversary has access to 3 oracles. The first oracle can be queried with a message and 2 possible admissible modifications, so 2 possible sets of admissible operations, and the oracle returns a signature of the message with one of the two sets of blocks declared as admissible. Then you have the sanitization oracle, where that can be queried with a message, a signature, and modifying instructions, which gives back a sanitized signature. And then you have a proof oracle, which I won't get into it, it's just there for completeness, but it's not important here. There's actually also a stronger version of this security notion, which is called strong invisibility. Don't blink, because you'll miss it. Of course, the adversary must guess the bit B, yes, of course. So this is a stronger version of invisibility, where actually the adversary now can query the left or right oracle under adversarially chosen sanitizer public keys and the sanitization oracle under adversarially chosen signer public keys. So this experiment is a bit stronger than the ordinary invisibility experiment. Okay, so let's get back to all the security notions for sanitizable signatures. As with any other cryptographic primitive, an interesting question is, what kind of complexity assumptions do you need to build a sanitizable signature scheme with all these properties or a reasonable subset of these properties? And there's prior work on this. So there is one paper by Bruschka et al. Who showed, where the authors showed that the 4 properties that you have here can actually be obtained under one-way functions alone. The scheme here basically uses 2 ordinary digital signatures. Then there's also another work where Bruschka et al. Again show that also linkability is achievable under one-way functions alone. And in this work, we show that for the property of invisibility, this is most likely not true. So it's very probable that invisible sanitizable signatures cannot be constructed from one-way functions alone. And we do this by proving that invisible sanitizable signatures are equivalent to public key encryption, which of course implies this result. And here equivalent means that we can construct one out of the other. So let's start with how sanitizable signatures imply public key bit. Okay, so back online again. So let's see how to construct a public key bit encryption scheme out of an invisible sanitizable signature scheme. So assume you... No. Okay. Assume that you have Alice and Bob. Alice wants to send a secret bit to Bob without the adversary learning it. So what they can do is they publicly agree on a sanitizable signature scheme to use, and on a message M composed of 2 blocks. And Alice gets herself a signer key pair, and Bob gets a sanitizer key pair. So first thing Alice does, she retrieves Bob's public key, and then she signs the message M, declaring the first bit as admissible. Had it been B equal to 1, she would have done the second bit. So here's the signature, and she sends the signature over to Bob. And what Bob basically does, he retrieves Alice's public key, and then he tries to sanitize in the only 2 ways possible. And well, if the sanitizable signature scheme now is sanitizing, correct, and immutable, which are 2 of very basic properties every sanitizable signature scheme should have, exactly one of the 2 signatures will verify, the other one will not be valid. So in this case, it will be the first one. So that way, Bob knows that Alice had chosen B equal to 0, and of course Eve doesn't learn the bit, because doing so from the communication would be equal to determining which one of the 2 blocks was declared as admissible, which is exactly what invisibility is meant to hide. So Eve doesn't learn anything. Now, more precisely, this is the theorem that we proved. So if the sanitizable signature scheme is sanitizing correct, immutable, and invisible, then a public key bit encryption scheme is correct and in CPA secure. And actually, if you use the stronger version of invisibility that I mentioned before, you also get in CCA security. You also need strong unforgeability of the signature. Okay. Now the other construction. So now we want to construct sanitizable signature schemes from public key encryption. Now remember that public key encryption implies one-way functions, so we actually also can use all the primitives that are implied by one-way functions, in particular ordinary signatures. So we have ordinary signatures and public key encryption in our toolbox, basically. So what Alice does, Alice gets herself a signature key pair, an ordinary signature key pair, and Bob has an ordinary signature key pair, which is the purple one, and the public key pair for the public key encryption scheme, which is the green one. And suppose, for example, that Alice wants to sign this message with this block structure and the two pink blocks declared as admissible. So first thing she does is she gets herself 5 is the total number of blocks. She gets herself 5 ephemeral key pairs for the ordinary signature scheme and signs every block under the respective secret key, and thus creates the tuple of signatures. She then creates an ordinary signature under her static secret key of the bit 0, the message, this tuple of signatures, and all the public information, where the bit and the public information is really only included for domain separation reasons. So it has no particular meaning, let's say. This is almost the first part of the signature, which is the part that the sanitizer will be able to change. And now we need to supply all the information the sanitizer needs to actually, to change the admissible parts. So Alice first creates the tuple of verification keys, which is called V, and then creates the tuple of that includes all the secret keys of the blocks the sanitizer is allowed to modify. So in this case, it's block 3 and block 5. And of course, this is appropriately padded because we want to use security of the encryption scheme, and that needs length invariant messages. So then Alice creates this encryption of the sanitizer public information, this key of this tuple of keys, and the admissible, so the tuple adm, and signs this, so the bit 1, the sanitizer public information, V, and the ciphertext under her secret key. And the final signature is then this one here. So all the signatures of the various blocks, the first signature we defined before, V, the ciphertext, and the second signature here. But then when Bob wants to sanitize the document, up until now he doesn't even know which blocks he's allowed to modify. But what he can do is he can check all the signatures that are there, check if they are authentic. And if so, he can go on and decrypt the ciphertext, and from here he learns which blocks he's allowed to modify. Then suppose he wants to change the first block, so fox into cow. He can use the secret key for the third block, which he can get from kadn, to produce a new signature as prime. And then he basically changes only the first part of the total signature, leaving the second part unchanged. And verification is very easy. When Bob wants to verify a message, he just simply checks all the signatures, and if they all verify, then he accepts the signature. The precise statement of what we managed to prove is here. So if the signature scheme is unforgeable and the public key encryption scheme is in CPA secure, then a sanitizable signature scheme has, well, a lot of interesting security properties, but also invisibility. And if the public key encryption scheme was in CCA secure, then you actually achieve strong invisibility. So we have the double implication in both directions. So to summarize, in this work we have shown two constructions, how you can obtain public key encryption from invisible sanitizable signatures and the other way around. And this proves that most likely invisible sanitizable signature schemes cannot be obtained from one-way functions alone. That's it, thank you.
time for questions. No questions? Let's take that. Okay.
So then the final talk for today's session will be given by Jan, and he will talk on anonymous credentials.
Thank you. We will actually be able to pass the whole title when I'm done, hopefully. But we will start with just anonymous credentials, actually. That's right. So as a quick refresher, anonymous credentials, we have 3 parties involved. We have a set of credential issuers, a set of users, and a set of verifiers. The idea is that a credential issuer can issue credentials to users, where credential use should think of as a signature on the user secret key or some deviation of the user secret key under the issuer's public key. Then the user can generate pseudonyms for himself, and basically all the verifiers and all the issuers will know the users only under those pseudonyms, where as a pseudonym you should always think of as an encryption of the user secret, or again some variation of that. And given a pseudonym and a credential, the user will be able to prove possession of such a credential to a verifier. And that process is usually a zero-knowledge proof of knowledge of such a signature. Okay. The whole thing is called anonymous credentials because if you have a second user in the system and the credential issuer also issues a credential to that one, then if he tries to authenticate with the verifier, then the verifier won't be able to tell which one of the 2 users is trying to authenticate. So this is all good. The trouble starts if we get a second credential issuer into the mix. So let's say we have this other issuer here, and then some user who gets a credential from this guy. Now if he shows the credential to the verifier, then this new user and the 2 other users are actually distinguishable for the verifier when he shows the credential. And that's for good reason, because the verifier needs to know who issues a credential in order to judge whether or not he should trust the credential issuer that's behind that. So the idea is in anonymous credentials, we usually just give the verifier the actual identity of the issuer who issued the credential to someone. Okay. So this creates an unfortunate situation where usually in order to get the best measure of anonymity for your credential system, you would have to set up your system so that ideally there's only one issuer in the whole system and everyone would just get their credentials from that one issuer, because then you have the highest degree of anonymity in this way. You don't run into those problems. But that's not how reality works. In reality you have a more layered approach usually. You have someone who gives certain rights to someone else, and then this one gives gives lesser rights to someone else, etc. So in such a hierarchy. And that's the idea for delegatable credentials now, where we have a credential issuer as before. Basically you can become a credential issuer by just publishing one of your pseudonyms. The idea is as before, the issuer can now issue a credential to someone. What's new is that someone can actually take their credential and delegate a weaker version of that credential to someone else, or a potentially weaker version of that credential to someone else. And I can complete the whole tree here, and now if these 3 people now kind of try to authenticate with the verifier, he won't be able to tell which one of those he's talking to. What he will learn is specifically that there is like a valid chain of credential delegations that started at PK root, so at the actual trusted credential issuer up here. And if he trusts that credential issuer on the top, then kind of transitively he should also trust the intermediate steps. Okay, there are some constructions that actually do this. The idea that they usually follow is using these like certificate chains that you may also know from TLS and other stuff. The idea here is that you use your signature key to sign another person's public key, and then that person can take their secret key to sign another person's public key to extend the chain and so on. That is nice and it works. So your credential in that case would just be the signatures that you need on the path from the root public key to your own public key. The problem is that in order to make sense of that, of your own credential, you kind of need to know all of the public keys that are on this path in order to basically show anything about the signatures. So this has the drawback that you as a credential holder need to know the whole path, and so anyone who delegates to you is not anonymous in the way that you see the exact way where he got his credential. Then the idea to kind of solve this, that's a very popular one, is to actually wrap this whole credential chain into a giant Grotzer hyperproof, or any malleable signature, malleable proof system. And then interestingly, in this proof you can hide the public keys and the signatures, but interestingly, because the proof system is malleable, you can still kind of extend the chain and do all of the other operations that you need in order to get credential system out of it. Okay, so this kind of solves this drawback of having of the credential holder knowing all of the intermediate steps of the credential. Okay, up until now I haven't said anything about attributes, so now this whole thing becomes attribute based. The idea is that a credential is not just it's there or not, but it is parameterized with some attributes. So that could be a name or access level, something else. So let's say my credential now has attributes A1, A2, A3. Now the question that we ask ourselves is, what does that now mean? So if I have a credential with attributes A1, A2, A3, what can I now delegate to someone else? So what does that mean for my delegation capabilities? What kind of attributes can I give to someone? Prior work usually answered that by saying, okay, if you have certain attributes, you can append new attributes. So you can only add attributes, you can't remove any of them. So for example, if I have attribute A1, I can delegate A1 and A2. And this fits nicely into this whole chain idea, because you already have a signature scheme there, and while you're on it and signing these public keys here, you might as well also sign the attributes that you're adding to this credential. And again, the problem here is that even if you wrap this inside of a Grotzer hyperproof, at least with the techniques that we have right now, the user who holds the credential needs to know all of the attributes that are inside it. Basically, in the Grotzer construction, this one here is kind of part of a hash function, and you need to know the actual attributes to make sense of it. So basically, the point I'm trying to drive home is there's no anonymity for delegators in this scenario. Okay, we actually deviate from this approach in two ways. Basically, we don't create our credentials by doing this chain idea, so we don't embed the delegation chain inside of our credentials. And secondly, our model of what attributes I can delegate is radically different. So how do we do this? The idea is that my attributes that I have in my credentials, they determine what I can delegate. More specifically, credentials in our systems are parameterized with a vector of attributes, A1 through AN, where each attribute AI can either take on a specific bit string, so this is a concrete attribute then, or it can take on this placeholder star value. The idea is that the star basically covers every possible concrete attribute. And then the credential also has a delegation flag D, which tells me whether or not I can actually delegate this credential to someone else. And then the delegation semantics that I have is basically, if I have a credential with A1 through AN, which some of them are stars, I can issue someone else A1 prime through AN prime if my delegation flag is 1. And if in this new attribute vector, all the positions that were not stars and not placeholders in my own credential, they need to be the same in the derived credential. So I can't change any of the attributes that are kind of fixed in my credential. So for example, if I have a credential with star star y, then I can give someone this credential where I keep the first star intact and fix the second star to a concrete attribute x. But I can't give someone for example, star xz because my credential has a fixed y and I can't change it in derived credentials. Okay. And then I can kind of prove possession of a credential with certain attributes, having basically the same semantics as for the delegation. So I can plug in any value for the star that I like. Okay, to get kind of an intuition of how all of this works, let's take a look at a simple example. Let's say our policies are just with 3 attributes, A1, A2, A3, and our policies say that I need attribute A1 equal to 1 to access system 1, and A2 equal to 1 for system 2, etc. So what I can do, basically the root of all of this gets the most powerful credential, which is star star star, which covers everything that you could ever wish for. Then you can give a weaker version of that credential. For example, you could say, okay, you can access all of the systems except for the first one. Access to the other systems is granted by the star covering the attribute 1. And then this person can again delegate this credential, or in this case even a weaker version of it, to someone else. You can also do something more fun, like here, where you give someone the ability to access service 2 by giving them a non-delegatable credential that allows access to service 2, and then additionally give them a credential that does not allow access to service 2, but allow that one to be delegatable. So then you get kind of the idea that there are some things that I can access, but I can't delegate the access rights to someone. Okay. And then the nice thing is, again, we have this nice indistinguishability, because the verifier will again just see, okay, this is a credential that's somehow derived from the root of this whole thing. Okay. In order to construct this in actual system, the idea for our construction is a new type of signature scheme, which we call dynamically malleable signatures, or for short DMS. To explain those, I should say, the idea of those is basically it's a malleable signature, but kind of at runtime you can successively weaken the malleability relation that this thing allows. More concretely, let's start with a standard signature scheme, where you have a keygen for n messages. You have a sign algorithm, which you put in your secret key and the message, you get a signature. You have a verify algorithm, where you put in your message and your signature, and everyone can verify that it's a valid signature. The new thing for dynamically malleable signatures is, when I sign something, I also give the sign algorithm a index set I, which is a subset of all of the possible positions in this message vector here. And then with that I, the idea is that this sign algorithm gives me a malleability key mk, which will allow me to actually change all of the positions in M that are present in I. So the idea is everything that I put into I, those positions will be malleable in the signature, and the positions that are present in I, those messages will not be malleable. Okay, and malleability then formally is done using this transform algorithm, which takes the old message, a new message, the signature and malleability key, and then also a new index set. And it will produce a new signature and new malleability key with actually the same distribution as the sign algorithm would, with the new message and the new index set. In order for this, so this correctness basically says this only needs to work, it will usually only work if all of the messages in the old ones and the new ones agree at the positions that are not malleable in this signature, and then I can only get a malleability key for a smaller, or some relation that's at least not larger than the one that I started with. Good. So unforgeability then says that it's basically the standard unforgeability game. The adversary gets the public key, can query the sign oracle with arbitrary inputs, and he will actually get the signatures and the malleability keys. Eventually, the adversary outputs a candidate signature on a message, and he wins if the signature is correct, so it verifies. And if the a signature on this message that he gave us is not trivially derivable from the things that he queried. One thing that demands attention here is that this actually completely prevents collusion. So if I give you two signatures with different malleability keys, you can't use the one malleability for the one signature in any way to change the other signature. So those are kind of independent of one another. Good. We actually have a really easy construction of those, which are based on Ponce-Vasanes signatures. This is just standard Ponce-Vasanes now. You have a secret key which consists of X and some YIs. And then in order to sign a message, you would choose a random group element H, and your signature is H, and H to the X plus a linear combination of your messages. So then you can check with that signature has this form using the pairing and the things from the public key in the second group in a pairing-based setting. And the thing that you have to notice here is that it's kind of easy to make this malleable. If I want to enable you to change the message MI, I will just give you H to the power of YI. And that's exactly what I do, because then I can kind of multiply that H to the YI here, and then I get something else for the MI. So the malleability key consists of all the H to the YI, where the I is in the index set, so in the set of malleable positions. Then the transform algorithm does exactly what you would think it would do. It would compute the right-hand side of the signature, would use the H to the YI to change the messages that are in there. It would then re-randomize the signature, so that basically all the signatures that come out of transform have the same distribution as the sign algorithm, and also in order to ensure that basically the signatures don't have any relations anymore that you could kind of use to try to use a malleability key for signatures that you shouldn't be able to use it for. And lastly, you can, the thing re-randomizes and weakens the malleability key by removing all of the H to the YI that shouldn't be there anymore, and by also applying the same factor here in the exponent as for the signature. So that all of this is now to the base H to the R. So all of this construction is proven secure in the generic group model. There is probably some way to construct those from standard or more standard assumptions. I'd be really interested to, if anyone has an idea how to do this, then I'd be really interested. Okay, what we also do in the paper is a generic construction from dynamically malleable signatures to delegatable attribute-based anonymous credentials with the meaning that I've explained before. And you probably can already guess how this is going to look like. The interesting thing is that we kind of use the standard template for non-delegatable attribute-based credentials, where my credential is just a single signature. But then instead of the standard signature scheme, we use the dynamically malleable signature to implement the star, the placeholder, and the actual delegation of credentials. And so the idea is that if I have a credential for certain, for these attributes, then this corresponds to a signature, a dynamically malleable signature on the user secret of my current user secret. Then for the two stars here, I will just assign arbitrarily 0 and make those positions malleable by putting them into the index set. And then the actual concrete attribute that I have in there as well. Okay. And now when I delegate this credential to someone else, what do I need to change? I need to change the user secret in there. I need to change, in this particular case, this star to a concrete value. And I can kind of use malleability to achieve this. So I can use malleability to change this 0 to an X, and then remove it from the index set, to change this USK to this USK prime, and then remove this from the index set. Removing this from the index set is basically done because in this case I want to delegate a non-delegatable credential, so that the receiver should not be able to give this further to someone else. And this is easily achieved by just making the user secret non-malleable, meaning that in this signature it will forever be the same user secret who can use that signature. Okay, the rest is then kind of boilerplate construction of anonymous credentials. So pseudonyms are encryptions of the user secret, basically, plus dynamically malleable signature, public key, in order to root credentials at that pseudonym. To show, I would just run a zero-knowledge proof of knowledge of such a signature here. And yeah, I also have an opener, like in the group signature scheme, where I would just decrypt the pseudonym to get some hint about what the user secret is. Okay, that's what I wanted to talk about. Basically, all of this approach has some advantages and disadvantages. The nice thing is it's very efficient because the proofs and credentials are independent of how many delegations it went through, which comes at the price that I also can't extract the delegation chain anymore. So in the prior work, people could actually have a special key and take a look at who delegated this credential to whom, so the complete chain. But that information in our construction is just not there, so nobody can extract it. This is a drawback in some scenarios. And then also this efficiency kind of comes with the price of having this non-standard assumption that we proved our signature scheme under. Okay, that's it. Thank you.